Good evening and welcome back to the Weekend Primetime. We are less than 5 months out from the midterms, and tonight President Trump faces setbacks, both personal and political. You're looking at one of the strangest sights in Washington, a giant striped tarp still covering the Kennedy Center facade at this hour as court filings showed that behind that tarp, Trump's name has been removed. We just got a new statement from the Kennedy Center last hour saying that it is establishing something called the Trump Kennedy Center Fund. The Kennedy Center's vice president of PR said in a statement, in part, quote, "We remain fully compliant with the court's directive while we evaluate legal options regarding the board's unanimous vote. The establishment of the Trump Kennedy Center Fund is intended to recognize President Donald J. Trump's significant contributions and dedication to America's premier cultural center." MS Now has asked the Kennedy Center for clarity on what this new fund intends to contribute to and where they're seeking funding from, either from private donations or federal funding. And then there's Trump's unpopular war with Iran that spiked gas prices at home and abroad. After teasing multiple deals that have failed to materialize, this week Trump again publicly threatened military strikes, only to back down hours later. Earlier today, Trump said a deal would be signed with Iran tomorrow. So for the sake of world peace, let's hope it happens. Meanwhile, at home, Trump caved on his controversial pick to head national intelligence, pulling top housing official Bill Pulte's nomination after an unprecedented rebellion from within the GOP. He's now pivoting to federal prosecutor Jay Clayton. Then there's the economy, the issue that arguably helped him defeat Biden and win a second term in the White House. A recent Economist YouGov poll shows 63% of Americans now disapprove of how Trump is handling the economy, which is an all-time low for either of his terms. Listen to what MS Now Alex Tabbitt heard from 2 Ohio voters who voted for Trump 3 times. Watch.
You said you'd bring down the grocery prices. Literally, I must be the most angry person when I grocery shop because I buy the same things every week and I see it jump every week.
All we heard was drill, drill, drill during the election, and now all we're getting is drilled into the dirt with these prices. So I'm not a fan of them. I voted for Trump all 3 terms. To be honest with you, I'm not a big supporter of him at this point.
Joining us now are Basil Smikle, MS Now political analyst and professor of practice at Columbia School of Professional Studies, and former New York Congressman Mondaire Jones. He's also a member of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights.
And a Knicks fan. You got to introduce him.
Yeah, look at that. He's wearing the gear.
I mean, we got to explain to our viewers why you're wearing a T-shirt, but it's like it's as if we're.
I think they've heard a little bit about what's going on in New York City.
We're on the cusp of making history.
I'm ready.
There is a lot of energy in New York City tonight. You definitely say.
Yeah.
But back to the very invigorating topic of national politics.
Yes,
so, Basil, when you hear Trump voters talking like that, are these outliers, or is finally the incredibly Teflon base of Donald Trump starting to melt smooth a little bit around the edges?
Yeah, first of all, go Knicks. Secondly, I don't think it's an outlier, but I don't think these are voters that are automatically going to vote Democratic, right? I think, there has to be a permission structure that Democratic candidates create to be able to get former Trump voters to say, you know what, I might vote for a Democrat today. My guess, though, is that you're going to see a lot of ticket splitting. They'll go vote for Republican down the line, but, at some point in 2028, they may not vote for anybody who aligns themselves with Donald Trump. That remains to be seen. But today, these are voters that I think are gettable. It's going to be incredibly difficult, but those mobility promises that Donald Trump gave to those voters have dissipated quite significantly, quite quickly. But that's why I think it's also important for Democrats, when they're running, they run in their districts, right? They run in their states. There has been a lot of talk around, Plantner in Maine, but there's Talarico, there's Ossoff, there's Sure, right? There's Brown in Ohio, and the fact that Ohio is that we're talking about Ohio is also a significant sign. So yeah, I don't think it's unique. I do think it's more widespread. The question is, can Democrats actually get those voters at the end of the day?
I think you're also going to see Republicans, to a large extent, stay home. I mean, they're not going to be as energized and not going to be as motivated to come out to vote, on top of people who would be willing this cycle.
Is that because Trump's not on the ballot, or is it because the situation in the country is not, very exciting for anyone to get mobilized?
I think,
is there somebody who could step in post-Trump and say, like, all right, I'm going to try to animate that?
I think Trump is somewhat unique in the history of this country, but it is also the case, I think, that both of the things you mentioned are true. I think there are certainly going to be people who are willing to say, you know what, he lied to me, and I once was a fan in the way that some of those Ohio voters that you just featured on this show in that clip talked about. And then there are people who, are going to say, I'm just going to stay home.
Yeah, I feel like some people are going to be disenfranchised irrespective of who's on the Republican ticket, just because they feel like, Donald Trump was the great white hope and he just didn't deliver on that. I think that soundbite from the guy was really powerful. It was like, drill, drill, drill. And all we're getting is we're just getting drilled down by these gas prices.
Well, Alex Tabbitt had pretty extensive conversations with those voters. Yeah. And the woman who you saw first describing her grocery prices go up also described that she has been experiencing like near constant panic attacks because of what she's just dealing with and the financial pressure that she wanted to retire, but she's basically unable to retire. And so this is having like a real, people talk about like kind of voter psychology all the time. Like a lot of this stuff is causing genuine like mental health outcome issues for Americans right now.
I was going to say, are they assured by the fact that like Trump is putting his name on the Kennedy Center and the UFC fight and...
Oh, yeah. We're saying
is that bringing them any joy? Is that bringing?
It's not covering their bill.
It's not bringing joy to their life.
We're saying he doesn't care about inflation.
Yeah,
which is wild for any president of the United States.
Yeah, it's so true. When he said that about the when Iran, he's like, I just don't care about like what's happening to Americans.
That is.
Yeah, I mean, the second he said that, I was like, there are definitely like operatives logging onto their laptop like right now to cut that into an ad to run against.
That's what happens when he doesn't have to run for a third term. Yeah. He feels like he can just say whatever.
But, and I think about that, going back to this point about the opening, I forget his name and I apologize for this, but Ken Paxton's attorney.
Oh, we're going to have him on, yeah. Don Cogda.
You're helping us following our interview.
Dan Cogda.
An hour.
Well, I'll say it and preview that. The fact that he says, I'm not voting against Paxton, I'm voting for Tallarico. That is an incredibly important distinction. Right? Because there might be a lot of anti-Trump votes out there, but the Democrat in the race, whatever race there is, still has to make themselves really just appealing to those candidates, right? You've got to give people something to vote for and not just against, and I think that's the sort of important.
Well, what are the clues that some of these Democrats are giving you about the permission structure you were talking about before that needs to be created so that the people who voted for Trump 3 times might genuinely actually be open to a Democrat's messaging again?
Well, look at Sherrod Brown. I mean, he's talking economic populism, right? And he is, I would say, culturally relevant to his state. Ultimately, you don't often want to nationalize races, but a lot of these races are being nationalized because Trump is such, a thing that you want to run against, and that's going to help. But at the same time, you got to really speak directly to what voters are asking for in those states, in those districts. And interestingly enough, you have some candidates running against the Democratic Party.
I was just going to say,
and that actually,
Jamie Ager in North Carolina.
I mean, there are others. I mean, Plattner is running against Schumer. Everybody's running against Chuck Schumer right now. And there's, and there's nothing wrong with that. Even Nancy Pelosi would say, you can run against me. I don't have a problem with that. If you need to win, just go win your race.
Yeah, she has said that repeatedly over the years. And it's the right thing for any leader in Congress, I think, to allow when it comes to people running in different places in this country, in different regions, in different communities. The vast majority of Americans feel like both parties have failed them. Yep. So it would be crazy for someone to look at a candidate in a swing district or a swing state criticizing the Democratic Party alongside the Republican Party and feeling offended by that. I mean, it is also just a fact that this country, especially when it comes to issues like the economy, has been not well served by either of the two parties over the years. Obviously, the Democratic Party has tried to do more for working people. There's no question about that. But when it comes to things that have been blocked over the years by people like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who at the time were affiliating with the Democratic Party, I think it's really hard to say that, one party is pure when it comes to this stuff.